In this lecture, we'll talk about hashes, time, and required relative. So hashes are your indexed collections of object references. And in other languages, they might be known as dictionaries or maps or hash maps. But basically, what hashes are just a collection of key value pairs. And they are created with either a curly or a hash.new. And then they're also known as associative arrays. And basically, the idea is that you could think of hashes as arrays or as collections, basically. And unlike the arrays where you access the values in the array with an integer, right? So the zeroth element of an array will be something that's accessed with a zero index. In hashes, the index is the actual key that you put the value in. And we'll see that in a minute. And the values are set using this funky arrow operator. Or once you create the hash, you could use the index operator to overwrite the values. So for example, you have an editor props hash that has three values here. You have a font, key, value is Arial, size, key, and value is 12, color, key, and value is red. Now the above is not a block. It looks like a block. It could be mistaken for a block, but it's not a block, it's a hash. And we'll discuss the difference between hashes and blocks in a few slides. So you know that editor props.length will give you 3 because there are 3 values in there, 3 key value pairs. And you could access a specific key value pair, actually a specific value by passing in the key to the index operator. And then the editor props background lets you put something into the hash. So you could put the value bool in there. And then instead of using .each, which is what you would use in an array to loop over the values in the hash, you use each underscore pair, and in the block you get 2 variables, the key and the value, and you could say key is this and value is that. So what if you try to access a value in the hash for which an entry does not exist? You'll get back a nil. Well, what if you don't want to get back a nil? Let's say you want to get back a 0. So when you create the hash, you could say hash.new, and you could specify the default for an entry that does not exist. And we'll see in a minute why that's useful. And I just want to reiterate here that hashes API is very important to master. So far we have the string API, the arrays API, and hashes API is also very important. So I'll take a long look at those 3 APIs. So let's see an example of a hash. So you have the word frequency hash, which is created to that 0. So hash.new 0. So 0 in this case is the default if an entry is not found. Then you have a profound sentence like chicka chicka boom boom, and you want to split that sentence up. So basically sentence is just a string. You're splitting it up, not specifying what you're splitting it up on, so that it knows to split it up using white space. And then you want to loop over each word in that sentence, and you want to count up the word frequency of a sentence. So what you do is you convert it to a lowercase with a downcase method, and then you check the word frequency hash with that key. Does that exist? Or it will give you back a 0 if it doesn't exist, and you just increment that and put it back in the word frequency and whatever the word is, key as a value. So you don't have to check if it's there or not, and if it's not there, add a 0, put a value in there, increment it by 1. You just assume that it's a 0 if it doesn't exist, and then you just increment it by 1. So at the end you get this word frequency hash, which has chica key equals 2 and boom key also equals 2. Now, as of Ruby 1.9, this was a while ago, they made some good improvements. So number 1, the order of putting things into hash is actually maintained. Now, this is kind of interesting one because usually you don't think of hashes as something that maintains the order, Usually you think of arrays or lists as something that maintains the order, and hashes are just your key value pairs. But the truth is, even in Java, you have something like a linked hash map, which maintains the order of entries in the hash map in addition to being able to access it using the key value pairs. Also, if using symbols as the keys, you can use the symbol colon syntax as opposed to use for the key, as opposed to using the key and that funky arrow for putting values into the hash. Also, if a hash is the last argument to a method, the curlies are optional. Now, when I say the last argument, I mean the last argument not including the block. So let's see what that looks like. So you could have a method called adjust colors, and you could have props, which is an argument, and it has a hash of foreground red and background white. So this is your default parameter, essentially. And this is a hash, and you're specifying the key values not with that arrow, but because foreground is a symbol, you just do foreground colon, background colon, which looks exactly like JSON. And then you could do props foreground to actually output it if it exists, and background if props background exists. So adjust colors, and if you don't pass any parameters, it will print out foreground is red and background is white because you didn't pass anything in, so it will automatically use the default parameter. Now you could also pass in a hash of foreground green. So even if you're using a symbol, you could use the arrow for creating your hash. But of course, to me at least, the more logical way is to create it using the foreground colon as opposed to doing it colon foreground and then the arrow value. Also, because hash is the only parameter, which is arguably the last parameter to a method as well, you don't have to specify the curlies. So the parentheses are always optional, but even the curlies you could drop, so you could just have a method name and the hash that you're passing into a method. And of course, you could also use the symbol and the arrow syntax, so key and then the value, and not specify the curlies. So let's talk about the hash and the block confusion. So let's say you have a hash called a hash with a key value of 1, 1, 1. And then you want to output the hash. So you say puts a hash. Okay, so that works great. You get 1, 1. So far, so good. Now, let's say you don't want to create a variable called a hash, and you just want to output it in one step. So you want to say puts, and then you want to output this hash 1 with a key 1 and a value 1. Well, you can't do that. That will be a syntax error. The problem is that Ruby gets confused and thinks that the curlies are not a hash but a block. So it has a method puts, and then it sees a block, and then it thinks to itself, wait a second, puts doesn't take a block. This is weird. So to get around it, you could have two ways to get around it. You either have to put parentheses around this hash. So if you put parentheses, then it says puts the one parameter. Oh, okay, I get it. There's a parameter being passed in. That's what the parentheses emphasize. And the parameter is a hash. I know how to deal with that. Puts knows how to deal with that. It converts it to a string, and it outputs a hash. Or the other way to get around it is you drop the curlies altogether. So you do puts 1, 1, and this way block has to have either curlies or do end. So in this case, there are no curlies, so it says, okay, this is not a block, obviously, because it doesn't have curlies, so it must be a hash. Another API, time. So in Ruby, dealing with time is very intuitive. So time.now gives you today, and then today has many methods on it. So you could grep for a method. So today.methods.grep, and for example, a regular expression Monday or MON will give you either the month or Monday, and you could query it. Is today a Monday? False. And then what month is today? Today is the 11th month, for example. You also could do, let's say, one day, which is 60 seconds, 60 minutes, and 24 hours, and you could subtract that one day from today, and you'll get yesterday. And then tomorrow is just today plus one day, which will give you tomorrow. And then you could query, is today, between yesterday and tomorrow, and that's true. One other topic, require relative. So far, everything we've seen is just one file, but a lot of times you'll have multiple files that you want to run together, not just one file. So far, let's say just run test.rb, and that's it. But let's say you want to split your code up into multiple files. So to load one file from another, you specify the require relative, and you specify the path. So for example, you have a file called 6_file1.rb. In the same directory, you could say require relative _relative 6_file1, which is the name of this file. And you don't even have to specify .rb because it knows that you're trying to load a Ruby file. And then you could call a method from this other file by saying hello_ from file1.